There are some things that we can and should learn from Joseph of Arimathea, because at this critical time in Scripture, this man whom we have never heard of steps forward at great personal risk to take care of the human remains of Jesus. His actions are so much a part of the story that all four of the gospel writers tell his story. Let's get a little bit of the context here. As you know, on the morning of crucifixion, even though Pilate had declared Jesus not guilty 3 times, bending to the crowd, he ends up sentencing Jesus to death. Around 9 or 9:30 a.m., they crucified him. And for the Romans, crucifixion was much more about inflicting pain than causing death. Many times those crucified would hang on their cross for days, allowing animals to eat at their bodies and ultimately for the body to simply begin to decay. And at this point, the corpse would be taken down and thrown into the dump. In the case of Jesus, there are a couple of things to note here. Because it normally took the crucified so long to die, and this was Passover, the Jews appealed to Pilate to speed up the deaths. Perhaps this also was an excuse to hasten Jesus' death. But it was true that they wanted no one hanging on a cross during Passover. So John tells us that Pilate dispatched soldiers to break the legs of the 3. This would substantially hasten their deaths. However, when they came to Jesus, they discovered that he was already dead. The other thing of note here is that when Joseph asked for the body of Jesus, Pilate was genuinely surprised that Jesus was already dead. Confirming with the centurion that Jesus was indeed dead, Pilate granted Joseph the corpse of Jesus. And that's an interesting choice of words. This leads us to believe that if Joseph hadn't stepped forward, then the Romans would have disposed of Jesus' body in the usual way, which was to simply throw it in a dump. It would seem logical that Pilate was living in a day of surprises, actually. Quite likely he was surprised that the religious authorities would actually kill a man which was innocent. He was surprised that Jesus died so quickly. And he was likely surprised when a member of the Sanhedrin, the group who insisted on having Jesus killed, requested his lifeless body. Although we don't believe we know a great deal about Joseph, from the 4 Gospels we can discern some pretty specific characteristics. And one of those is about his own character. Character is not recognized by going along with the crowd when you know something is wrong. It is recognized by doing things with integrity and honesty and no personal agenda except to do what you believe before God to be right. Joseph, so we're told, was this type of man. Potentially what he was in public, he was in private. Others recognized him as a good and righteous person and well respected. A second characteristic is his faith. Joseph of Arimathea, who at least in the Gospel of Mark is not a disciple, ironically models one of the signs of discipleship. Jesus told his disciples, "You will stand before governors and kings because of me as a testimony to them." That's Mark chapter 13. Joseph is the first disciple to act as such, and he puts himself at risk in doing so. Rome executed Jesus as King of the Jews, a title meant to mock both Jesus and the Jewish people. But kings have followers, so Joseph, in asking the governor for the body of Jesus, risked being taken as a follower of a man convicted of sedition. More, were Joseph a member of the Sanhedrin, which according to Mark not only unjustly convicted Jesus, but harassed him as well, then Joseph also risked ostracism from his own people. Nor does Joseph of Arimathea think that Jesus is going to rise from the dead. If he did, the boulder in front of the tomb, the one the women wonder about how they will move it, is at best a disincentive to exiting. If we read John's account, so is 100 pounds of myrrh. In claiming the body of Jesus and placing it in the tomb, Joseph of Arimathea has nothing to gain and everything to lose. He's the model of Jesus' comment, "For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." Mark chapter 8. Nicodemus, who is mentioned only in the Gospel of John, not only helps Joseph of Arimathea prepare the body of Jesus and bury it, he also has a personal audience with Jesus and later defends him against his accusers. His name can be symbolic. Nico, which is the same Greek term as the athletic brand Nike, means victory. Demos, from the root that gives us terms like democracy and demagogue, it means people. So etymologically, Nicodemus means conqueror of the people or victory over the people. It's a pretty optimistic name for parents to give a child, and it's also pretty ironic in John's gospel. Whereas John introduces him as there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews in chapter 3, Jesus undercuts his role. He says, "If you are a teacher of Israel and yet you do not understand these things?" In some ways, it seems that the conqueror here has been conquered. To help us in interpreting this description, we backtrack a little bit to Nicodemus's two other appearances in the Gospel of John. Each time he appears, he fails to move past the interested and even sympathetic observer to the disciple stage. We meet him first in chapter 3, where John introduces him as a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews, who comes to Jesus by night. That's John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. He is both literally and figuratively in the dark. The fourth gospel plays with images of light and darkness. Jesus is the light of all people, the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The light to whom the baptizer testifies, the true light which enlightens everyone. The light that has come into the world, the light of the world. And there's several more, actually. Nicodemus needs to get himself out of the dark, but we don't know for sure if he ever quite makes it. What we do know is that in each of his appearances in the Gospel of John, he becomes a bit more daring, or a bit more willing to be seen as someone who might not only associate with Jesus, but who might actually believe him. His second appearance comes before the Sanhedrin, in which he defends Jesus to his own colleagues. And that's a pretty marked difference from the person who would only converse with Jesus under the cover of night. And when he appears for the third and final time, he's accompanying Joseph of Arimathea in retrieving Jesus' body from the cross and preparing it for burial. Much like Joseph in this action, Nicodemus has nothing to gain and, quite frankly, everything to lose. What the Gospel of John lacks in giving us a stated proclamation of faith in Jesus from Nicodemus, it in some way makes up for by action. And in reality, not all proclamation needs to be done by words. Friends, as we move through the final hours of Holy Week, I invite you to think back on all of the characters we've met along the way this week, those that we have called the witnesses at the cross. In the end, we can't, with a whole lot of surety, determine who was actually at the cross other than the soldiers. And in offering different configurations of the people at the cross and different descriptions of what they said and did, the gospel writers are not attempting to record what happened. It is as if they are transcribing a videotape. They're telling a story about Jesus of Nazareth, his life and his death. And the story they tell is based on how they understand Jesus. And with their templates that they create, the story continues even into our own day. But what we do know is that God was present all along, as was the Spirit that Jesus breathed out in John's account. The heavens were opened, God mourned, and nature itself mourned. And moreover, we know the end of the story. Mourning will turn to joy, joy will turn to commission, death will come again, and so the text promises will come new life. Professor A.J. Levine says, "I see the witnesses at the cross first as figures we all might try on. Do we doubt or sometimes even scoff? Do we, like those who read the Titulus, wish Jesus really were that political rebel who brought about the end of Rome? Do we see ourselves sometimes carrying that cross ourselves, as did Simon of Cyrene? Might we be waiting for a miracle when nature speaks miracles all around us? Are we waiting for that sign from heaven in order to believe, or are we content to follow our friends who do have this faith because we see how it works for them? Do we admire Jesus but not find ourselves worshiping him as a divine Son? And if so, do we find ourselves welcomed among those who do have such faith? Are we parents whose children confound us or who travel paths we do not want them to take? Who comforts us in their absence? Are we blended families beholding new parents and new children? Are we citizens horrified at what is done by our governments or its agents? Do we seek mercy for the crimes we have committed, or do we despair that nothing can be done? For each figure at the cross, we can provide these backstories, words to speak at the time, words to speak the next day, and words ultimately to speak on day one, that first Easter Sunday. When Jesus in the first two Gospels cries out the first line of Psalm 22 and the bystanders think he is calling Elijah, we're reminded of 1 Kings chapter 19. God tells the prophet, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And the prophet obeys. And now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. Listen closely. Jesus has died. The witnesses have departed, some to their homes and some to the roads leading out to the city, some back to elegant palaces and others to carry a body to a tomb. Some scoff, others weep and beat their breasts. Two will remain affixed to crosses unless someone else comes to claim their bodies. The soldiers will take Jesus' garments, and one centurion will wonder at what he had witnessed. God and nature remain, but we all come away from the cross changed in some way. Friends, let's think on that as we prepare to celebrate God's glorious promise of resurrection.